Hello and welcome to another edition of PM Express, the business edition. We'll be examining financing in the agricultural sector. Yes, agric is important to you and I. That's where we get our food stuffs from. That's where we get our crops from. That's where we get cocoa from. Now, I'm going to run you through three different sets of data. We're going to look at the growth rate in the sector. We're going to look at the share of the sector's contribution to GDP. And we're going to look at the financing of agriculture from the mainstream banks, that's the universal banks. Now, if you look at this data is from the 2019 budget. Now, you look at the agricultural sector, it's divided into four main subsectors. We have the crops, we have the livestock, we have forestry and logging, and we have fishing. In terms of growth rates, over a 4-year period, from 2014 to 2017, you realize that, yes, it's been on the upward trajectory, from 0.9% in 2014 to 2.9% in 2016, and now 6.1% in 2017. If you check in the 2019 budget, you realize that the growth in the sector was attributed to primarily the cocoa subsector, which was on the back of the planting for food and jobs. So yes, government intervention in this sector has had some effect in terms of the positive growth rates. But this growth rate, however, must be sustained over a long period of time for it to manifest into a strong growth in the agricultural sector. If you look at other ones, for example, you see that livestock, yes, has been on the up. Forestry and logging has moved from negative rates to positive rates. But you realize that fishing has come down from positive figures into negative rates. So this is a general picture of agricultural growth rates in Ghana. Moving on to the share of agriculture in GDP, you would realize that it's been steadily declining over a period of about 4 years, and it's been very, very consistent with its decline. Some argue that this is worrisome, some say no. If you look at the data, and again, this is from the 2019 budget, you realize that the share of GDP, that's gross domestic products, agriculture is 21%, industry 33%, and services 46%. Services obviously has overtaken agriculture in its share of GDP. Back in the day, agriculture was and is still the mainstay of the Ghanaian economy. Some argue, again, like I said, it's worrisome. Some will say no. Once we can find a space for the excess labor coming from this sector, and then the productivity is high, then there's nothing to worry about. Because in other developed countries, a small share of the GDP is dominated by agriculture, yes, but yet it's able to feed entire population and even have access to send to countries like Ghana. Now, if you go to the lending, which is the main focus of our discussion, we'll be exploring lending in the country when it comes to agriculture with my guests. Now, if you look at this data, and it's from the Bank of Ghana, and it's from their banking sector report. As of July 2018, that's when the report was released. If you look at this, as of June 2018, only 3.9% of credit goes to the agricultural sector. And then it's categorized as agric, forest, and fishing. Now, if you look at the data, it says about 38 billion was given out as loans for the period under review. If you did a calculation, it's about 1.5 billion Ghana cedis of lending to the agricultural sector. Some will argue this is little, because if you compare it to other areas such as, for example, commerce and finance is taking about 25.7% of the lending in the banking space. And this is just data for the 30 universal banks. We have rural and community banks which are in the hinterlands and are lending to farmers and the likes. But if you look here also, you realize that this same data says 33.9% of the loans in the sector as of June 2018 were non-performing, which means that loans that banks fear will go bad or are already going bad or have already gone bad. So this is just a snapshot of data for our discussion this evening. I hope you have a good time. My name is Philip Nanfuri.
It is ironic that 20 years ago, Ghana used to export meat, poultry meat and eggs to neighboring countries. Now we only produce 5%, less than 5% of our total demand for chicken. We import about 160,000 metric tons of chicken worth over $320 million a year. These figures translated into heads of chicken are 11 million heads of chicken a year equivalent that we import into this country. So we are very down on it, and the reason is very simple. The basic ingredient for livestock production, for poultry production, which is the feed, which constitute nearly 80% of cost of production, we are having to rely on imports of feed. And of course, if you are importing your feed, which is your basic product, you don't expect to be able to compete with imports. So Planting for Food and Job, what is done is to really increase production of maize that has everywhere from every region is going up considerably.
Yellow maize.
Well, maize, yellow maize, whatever maize, that is one component. The other component is soya beans. And soya beans, we are well short of what we need in order to make an impact on poultry feed. So the coming year, 2019, we are going to focus largely on the increasing soya production and in order to match the increase in maize to enable us to start making an impact on poultry. In fact, this is why we've held back on the issue about the poultry, the livestock development component, which is the rearing for food and jobs.
Hello and welcome back from the break. Now we've looked at the numbers, we've looked at the growth rates of the agricultural sector, we've looked at its share of GDP, and we've looked at data from the Bank of Ghana when it comes to lending to the agricultural sector. I'm going to introduce my guests and we're going to go through these numbers and find out why and how exactly we have these numbers when it comes to growth rates, our declining share of GDP, that's agriculture's declining share of GDP, and why there's little or low credit going to the agricultural sector. So my first guest is Mr. Foster Boateng. He's the Regional Director, West Africa for the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, that's AGRA. And we have Mr. Anthony Morrison. He's with the Chamber of Agribusiness in Ghana. So I'll start with Mr. Boateng because he's a technocrat. Mr. Boateng, thank you very much for joining us. Now, we've seen agriculture grow in terms of growth rate. In 2014, we had 0.9%, 2015, 2.3%, and now we have 6.1%. That's end 2017. From the budget, we saw that it was attributed to the cocoa subsector on the back of the planting for food and jobs. Can you walk us through, in terms of growth rates, why we had abysmal rates earlier on and why we are now having such, if I can argue, high rates?
Thank you for having me in your studio. First of all, let me say that agricultural growth is key, even if you look at the Malabo agenda and the CADEP, that all countries of AU must ensure that they can increase agricultural productivity and agricultural growth, annual growth of about almost 6%. And then also looking at investments moving up to about 10% of the total budget to go into agriculture. So it means that agricultural growth is key. If you look at most African countries, for that matter, it's an agrarian economy. And that is where we have most of our excess labor in rural areas. In Ghana, for instance, about 46% of the people are in rural areas, and 85% of them are smallholder farmers, and they are involved in agriculture. So if there's any way you want to reduce poverty, in any way you want to grow incomes, then that is where you have to focus. So for me, this growth is an indication that the country is making right investments in the agricultural sector. That's what I would say for now.
Okay. Mr. Morrison, I would say you are the man on the ground. Not to say Mr. Boateng is not, but what you see on the ground, does it resonate with the numbers?
Yes, obviously. You can talk about the current agricultural social intervention that the current government have put in place. These have driven a lot of enthusiasm in the industry. And you know, enthusiasm alone in a sector actually drives some level of investment. If you look at what we have for the statistics that we have.
We have the data to your left, so if you can just...
Yeah, so we have another one from the Ghana Statistical Services. I don't know if that's what you are using.
This is from the budget, 2019 budget.
Okay, so I want to make reference from the Statistical Services. Okay. So the agriculture sector expanded a growth rate of 3.0% in 2016. Mm-hmm. Then we saw a very huge increase in percentage to 8.4%, okay, in 2017. It is a share of the GDP, however, declined. Its share of the GDP, however, declined from 18.7% in 2016 to 18.3%.
And we'll come to that.
Now, what I'm trying to say is that the reason for that decline, okay, between that time and its upward movement is as a result of the fact that, yes, of course, we are seeing a lot of enthusiasm in planting for food and jobs. You've seen a lot of enthusiasm in other sectors of the agriculture. So irrigation is moving up, okay. Then we have also seen the one district, one factory, okay. So you look at the value chain, you realize that it's not only about production, but it's also about the value chain being made available to the private sector. And you see a lot of private sector sentiment, private sector upward movement. So I think this generally is as a result of the fact that, yes, of course, the government policies have been well opened up to the public, and there are a lot of enthusiasm going into that.
Okay, just a quick one here. The rates we are seeing here are based on rebased GDP. In September 2018 of this year, we rebased our gross domestic product as we changed the base year for calculation. So what Mr. Morrison referred to was the old GDP series. What we have now is the rebased GDP series. So the 6.1% correlates to the 8.4% in the old GDP series, and the 6.1% is the rebased GDP series. Now, Mr. Morrison, I will come to you on this before I come to Mr. Barton. You made mention of the share of GDP, the share of agric in GDP declining. Should we be worried about this?
No, I don't think so, because we have also seen an upwards movement in the service areas. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you really ought to understand the value chain. When you understand what goes into the various value chain, how the various value chain are reacting, then you can say whether we should be worried or not. But I think with the current evidence, based on what we are seeing, is something that we are okay with.
Okay, Mr. Barton, I always hear this argument that we are leapfrogging from agriculture to services, and as a developing economy, we should move in the right trajectory. So from agriculture, we go to industry, and we come to services. We have our share declining. From the budget, 2019 budget, we see that agriculture is about 21% share of GDP, services 46%, and industry 33%. Is this a cause for concern?
For me, it's a cause for concern. But you just can't look at just the decline of the GDP, agricultural share to GDP, and said, we have a problem. Definitely not. You see, depending on how our economy is structured, if you look at our economy, if you look at even developed economies, you realize that the share of agricultural GDP is declining. However, production and growth is high.
Okay. So that's where we have it wrong.
We have it wrong. You see, our share of GDP may be declining, but what is the growth in terms of production?
Okay.
Are we producing enough to feed the industry? Okay. Are we producing enough to feed ourselves? Okay. It doesn't matter how many people are in agriculture, but if we are producing enough to meet our dietary requirements, to meet our food needs, to meet our industries, then I can say there's no problem about that. But looking at Ghana as an agrarian economy, as I've said, probably we need to be more concerned about where we put the excess labor. Okay. Because we haven't developed our industrial sector very well. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we have excess labor in the rural areas. Where do we put them? Now they all rush to the cities. That's why they are getting our attentions. They drop they pick your mobile phone, or they snatch your nice wristwatch. You see, that is the cause for concern. Okay. So for me, it's not just about agricultural share to GDP declining. That is not the issue. But as to where are we putting the excess labor? Here today should have been in agriculture. Where are we putting them? That is my concern. Okay.
Since I was in school, let me take myself back to GSS. We've heard that we should get into agriculture.
Yes.
We sat in classes, we went to SS, we learned a bit about agriculture. Why do you think there's a problem? I'm sure you've heard this question over and over again. If we know it's good for us, if we know if we get into it, we can reduce our food imports, why over the course of time has this been difficult? Why has this been? Is it policy? Is it individuals? What has been the problem?
Combination of several factors. I think first of all, you remember, you just draw my attention to school days. You remember when a student does anything wrong, the teacher says, you go and weed. So we see farming as a punishment to begin with. So look at how it has gone into the psychic of kids. To weed for you is a punishment. And two, the kind of technology being used by our grandfathers in farming, the same antiquated method is being used now. And it's not attractive to the youth. These youth guys want sexy equipment to work with.
Okay.
I think this morning I was hearing debates on drones. And I said, my word, we are moving forward. Okay?
So we should adopt technology.
We should adopt technology that will attract the young folks to go into agriculture. Yesterday I was talking to the BBC and I said, look, let me tell you, we should generate interest from primary schools, not at the universities.
Okay.
Most people go into agriculture because he couldn't make the grade to do medicine. He couldn't make the grade to do pharmacy. So let me do agriculture as a second option. But that shouldn't be the case.
Okay.
We should see agriculture as lucrative. There is some money if we do it and do it well. The rich people in the United States are farmers.
Yeah, okay. It's true. Mr. Morrison, the reasons why we don't see an active push when it comes to agriculture. When you're in school and you're studying, you want to work in a bank. I have worked in a bank before. From the time I was a kid, I was like, you know what, I want to work in a bank. You don't see a lot of people venturing into it. And there's this misconception, I may say so, that when you enter agriculture, you're going to a big farm in some rural areas to go and weed, clear, and think. Why is there a problem when it comes to getting people into agriculture to move our nation forward? Because we know there are benefits to it.
Well, I think there are several factors that you can adjust to that. But mostly is the entry point knowledge about the industry. You don't just get into journalism. You didn't just get up and started presenting here. Yeah. You, of course, acquired some fundamental and primary entry point knowledge, which is very critical. And I think that it goes back to our education, just as my colleague here have rightly stated. The sort of development that we've seen over the years in our education, where you are asked to go and read and all that. But moving from that, we've also seen interest in other sectors. There, just as he said again, there are youth who are interested in technology. They are so fascinated about using their hands to do something, you know, and moving things around. So I think we have to reinvent agriculture in a different format, which of course we have done now, using the drones and sensors, talking about precision farming. So to a large extent, our education ought to change to the modern trend of agriculture education in order to encourage the youth and other people who are interested otherwise to go into the industry. It shouldn't be about the hoe and cutlasses. It shouldn't be about the normal punishment that has been tagged with it. Okay. So that if in agriculture institute, or maybe the agriculture farm institute or the agriculture colleges, if technology, more agriculture technologies could be developed or could be adopted, that could drive a lot of traffic into that industry.
Okay, thank you. I want us to move the conversation into financing, a very key aspect. Again, I'll go back to JSS. I see it in books all the time. Financing for agriculture is a problem. Yeah. Financing for agriculture is a problem. Is this a book thing or it's reality? Because we showed some data from Bank of Ghana that says, you know what, lending from the universal banks of agriculture is low. But that's just a fraction of the lending institutions in the country. That's just universal banks. Data availability in the country is a problem. It's a given. But Bank of Ghana says only 3.9% of gross loans as of June 2018 were given to the agricultural sector. They categorize as agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Is that the reality on the ground? Mr. Barton, I want to start with you.
I think that is true. Even recent statistics I looked at, it was just close to that, about less than 4%. And yet we are saying that agriculture is the backbone of the country. You see, the whole issue is about risk. Because people have tagged agriculture to be risky, especially in our part of this world. You remember, you can see that farmers are more of subsistence kind of industry that they find themselves in. They grow enough to feed their families. And then they also are exposed to a lot of risk in terms of climate change, in terms of diseases like fire armyworm attack, in terms of low yields, because farmers in Ghana, for maize, for instance, are getting 1.7 metric tons. Meanwhile, the potential yield is around 5 metric tons. So we need to look at how best we can intensify both at the extensive margin and intensive margin. In this sense, I'm talking about both vertical expansion in production and horizontal expansion in production. Then the farmers will be able to generate enough to be able to pay for the loan. Okay. So it's risky. They can't turn around and pay for the loan. Two, people like you and I who put on tie and sit in the bank also think that food is grown in a grocery shop. They want to give loans to farmers, giving them the same condition as they will give it to somebody who wants to go to Dubai, bring things and sell within 3 weeks and pay for. Agriculture has a gestation period. Yeah. So for me, there's a huge illiteracy problem for both the bankers and the farmers. Okay. Also, transactional costs dealing with smallholder farmers is very high. And so it makes agricultural loans very expensive. Okay. Okay? So coupled to all these things, banks don't feel comfortable. Remember, they are keeping people's deposits. They have to turn it around and get returns on it. So you don't blame them. When it's very risky, they don't want to go there. So that is the problem.
Mr. Watson, the banks in Ghana,
Yeah.
some will say, okay, let's give the bank some heat.
Yes.
But if you look at the structure of deposits in the
Yes.
country, they are short-term in nature.
Yeah.
We haven't developed our long-term nature. Our life insurance, not very developed. Our pensions, not very developed.
Yeah.
So if a bank mobilizes my deposits and he says he's giving me 3 months, 6 months, and he takes my funds and he puts it in a long-term view, and I come tomorrow and he says, oh, he has given my money to Mr. Morrison to go and farm and things, how do I then complain? Because it's the structure of the economy and the banking system as it is.
I agree with you. I think for me, if you look at the whole rural finance or agricultural finance, it's fragmented. So there's a market failure.
Okay.
Once there's a market failure, that calls for government to intervene. Because if you look at, okay, let me just put it this way. When it comes to rural finance or agricultural finance, we also target as credit for the poor. And then we create one size fits all. We don't create the required product features that can really address the needs of smallholder farmers.
Okay.
Okay? So whatever product that they have designed for those in commercial, maybe those in commerce, is the same kind of product feature they designed for agricultural farmers. So farmers will not pay the loan. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
I used to work for Sasakawa Global 2000. And farmers went to Agri Development Bank to borrow money.
That's ADB.
ADB. I remember way back, that was somewhere in 1992.
Okay.
And that time, you know what the farmers said? When they needed the money, they went to the bank several times, filled all papers. And then the bankers would tell them, oh, we'll come and inspect your business and make sure that we provide expert advice. Because they charge them a fee for that. But at the end of the day, they don't go there. When the farmers harvested and it was time for them to pay, you know what they told me? Mr. Boateng, when we needed the money, we went to the bank. The bankers should also come to the farm.
Okay.
So you realize that the bankers don't see the farmers as, they also have equity in that investment. Let the farmers feel that they want to pay back. But let's take somebody who has an industry. I'm sure the bankers will be visiting him quite often to see how the business is doing. So that kind of relationship is very key.
Okay. Mr. Morrison.
Yeah.
I saw you nodding your head during Mr. Boateng's submissions. Do you share a similar assertion when it comes to lending to the agricultural sector?
Yes, I do, because we are all in the industry. But let me put this statement that our major problem is data and research.
Okay.
All the challenges we have in the financing of the agriculture industry is non-availability of authentic, dependable, and well-revised data. Our agriculture industry is 70% rural economy based. And you see a lot of commercial banks being dependent on to finance agriculture while they are in the cities. Yes, of course, you can see them in the district, but in the district, they all do the normal commercial banking. What we need to do as a private sector, as policymakers, as stakeholders in the industry, is to sit down and actually look at the spine of the industry. Where is the heartbeat? Let's go in there, formalize them, and see how we can bring them into the tax bracket. Then you can also start giving proper credit. Now, you see, just as he said, the industry requires patient capital. You can't do anything. If you take our industry and farming per se, it's seasonal. And you give credit, take into consideration next month the person ought to start paying. I mean, where does it work?
It's difficult.
It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So it's something that we need to look at in a whole. We need a package, well-tailored and package a policy or system to drive what we're talking about. Now, that said and done, we're also trying to look at other areas of bringing out financing and not necessarily depending on the status quo, like the banks and other people. What about the FBOs, the farmer-based organizations, the smaller holder farmers, the cooperatives, finding their own innovative ways of financing themselves, which is very critical going forward into the next generation of agriculture financing.
Yeah. Okay, I want to quickly bring this in. We have something, for example, the Exim Bank, that's supposed to help the agricultural sector. Do you have any inclination as to whether this is really the case on the ground, whether they're really providing credit to farmers whatsoever? Do you have any inclination as to whether they are really helping us? Has been touted over the course of time.
The Exim Bank was structured or was set up to provide some strategic financing, not complete financing of the industry. For them to come up with strategic and stopgap financing, they had their own models for the cassava, mango, and other poultry strategic ways. Okay. So yes, they have been able to do what they have been put together to do, right down from, I think, 6 years ago, when they started its implementation. They've done a lot of mango support, they've done cassava, they've done poultry. But what we need to see or to look forward is the investment they have made. See, investment have to come with sustainability. We need to sustain. What we've seen over the years is we make investment into the industry, but how that investment is sustained, we don't look at it. We need to make sure that, yes, there is available market. There is also support system being given to that sector to develop. If you keep investing into the same industry and it's collapsing, you should know that there's a challenge. All right. Okay. So we need to work on that.
Let me come back a little bit on the issue about the agricultural financing. Okay. You mentioned about other instruments that are available. Yeah. That's why I said the market is fragmented, and the market also is not looking at other instruments that can be used in financing agriculture. Several of them. I mean, most of them you can look at, as you said, insurance could be another way of trying to really provide insurance to support crop insurance or weather index insurance. That will give the bankers also a comfort to really know where they put their money. I think also it's all about the bankers also. If you look at most of the banks we have, I think they are very used to corporate banking. And don't have the foggiest idea about agriculture. I think that's also another limitation.
So training for these bankers is critical. But you see, Mr.
And also policy. Okay. You see, if you look at the government policies, it's more biased towards urban areas. Infrastructure is booming in urban areas. Look at infrastructure in rural areas.
And we've had several documentaries on JoyNews, several stories showing the deplorable state of roads in areas that were receiving, for example, crops from.
Exactly. So the banks would not want to create agencies in such remote areas. So those farmers there don't have access to financial services. So that is where, as a policy, government comes in, not just government putting money for farmers to go and take a loan. No, that's not the business of government. Government should improve the infrastructure. Government should improve the regulatory environment. Government should encourage even some of these financial institutions to move to those rural areas.
But then you see, Mr. Watson, that is why rural banks are in such areas. And if the number is right, as at August 2018, there are about 138 rural banks. Maybe we may argue as to the scattering of these banks. But where the universal banks are failing, the rural banks are supposed to pick up and move on.
It is true. But what is the caliber of staff they have in rural banks? Okay. The caliber of staff. For instance, they can, looking at the profits they make, they can hire high caliber people to run such a business. Besides, with deplorable state of infrastructure, when they post you there, you will not go because you want your kids to enjoy good education. So these are things that you can use to attract high caliber staff to the rural banks.
Okay.
But is the advent of talking so much about agriculture, I mean, just one sector of financing is long overdue. Now we're talking about the value chain financing. Yeah. I think this is very critical. What the banks or the financial institutions or investors have failed to do is to look at the value chain financing. Because if you are going to finance me as a poultry farmer, you need to also look at who are my off-takers. You need to also look at who are the people supplying me the feed. You know, you need, as an investor or someone giving credit into that sector, you need to actually be sure that once you are putting in your credit or some investment, the value chain is well tailored so that it's synchronized in its system. It's a natural cost. I'll give you one example. I watched this video of a Texas company which is doing about almost close to 1 million beds every 5.5 weeks. The bank that gave the facility have brought in a consultant who understands the technicalities and also understand the financing models. He's there every day. He inspects the feed, and there are only 4 people on the farm. It's well automated. The last day, the off-taker was there.
Okay.
By 12 hours, the whole 1 million birds were gone, processed and gone.
Wow.
So what we're expecting from, the financing agencies, organizations, the banks and other things, is to go into portfolio management with these entrepreneurs, with these farmers. I don't want to even be talking about farmers. These are business people.
Okay.
They are into business.
Yeah.
Okay, farming is a business. So they need to go into joint program with them, stay with them, understand their challenges, get to know how to go about their financing models, so that when you are giving financing, you know that this person, actually, the risk you are talking about, the risk has been mitigated. But you look at the face value of it and think that, no, this is just a risk element, or there is a challenge with feed supply, there is challenge with off-takers. No. Stay with the system and understand the system.
Okay. Speaking of livestock feed risk, we heard from the Minister for Agriculture.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, so revenue for food and jobs. Revenue for
Food and jobs.
Jobs. Then we have the new one coming up. That's revenue for food and jobs is the new one. Planting for food and jobs is the one that was implemented.
Then we have the planting for export and industries
and rural development.
A lot of programs. Okay, so he says they are going to supply maize, soybean as feed for these. We've taken care of some of the problems. No.
You see, the poultry or the livestock industry is very critical. The maize, the soya are about 70% of the feed component. And that is actually the major cost for most of these business people in the livestock industry. If the cost of this soya, the cost of maize keep rising, obviously they'll have challenge with giving us affordable and quality livestock or food on the market, okay, or meat on the market. So I think I applaud the minister for that. It's something that the poultry farmers have been complaining about all throughout. So I think that strategically, it shouldn't only be just about supplying them. Let's see how consistent and sustainable this is. You had the prison service sitting idle. Why don't we get them to just farm maize and soya and give it to our livestock industry,
okay,
who are ready to buy? Once they can have a more cheaper, sustainable means of feeding their livestock, they are in business.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Martin, I'll take a quick break. Then when we get back, I'll get back to you. So we are taking a quick break. This is PM Express Business Edition, and my name is Philip Nanfuri. Thanks for staying with us. This is PM Express Business Edition, and I'm Philip Nanfuri. Before we went on the break, Mr. Barton was about to make a very serious intervention. So, Mr. Barton, please.
I'm sorry, not serious. Well, I think, first of all, let me clear this and say that government's role is to create enabling environment and opportunity for people to go in and make business.
Okay.
It's not a business of government to grow more soya bean and maize for poultry farmers. But if you look at the program that government is running, the idea here is our production is very low. First of all, if you have low production, you still have animals and human beings competing for food. So first of all, the idea and the planting for food and jobs is, can we select about 4 crops that are very key? Maize, soya, rice, and sorghum, and then some selected vegetables, and see if we can promote productivity and increase its productivity. In this case, how would government do that? Government would like to encourage smallholder farmers to use improved technology. And when farmers are going to try improved technology, they are risk averse. So government has to make the first investment and say, look, take this seed, go and try. Take this fertilizer, go and try. When they started seeing booms, then government has to really strengthen private sector to look at input distribution. Then farmers will go in and produce. Okay. So that is it.
Mr. Barton, you've mentioned the private sector.
Yeah.
In the presentation of the 2019 budget, the finance minister says government is going to implement the Ghana incentive-based risk-sharing system for agricultural lending. Sure. Guess out. GIRSAL. And it was in the 2017 budget. You've seen it in the 2019 budget saying that it's going to be operationalized.
Yes.
They're going to bring in 400 million, and an additional $14 million from the African Development
Bank to support
Bank.
that. Yeah.
From the research I have done, GESAL has been implemented in Nigeria by the Central Bank of Nigeria. In 2016, it was implemented, or it was launched by the Bank of Ghana under Dr. Isaaku, the former governor at that time,
Yes.
with technical assistance from your good institution,
Yes,
and then the Ministry for Food and Agriculture.
Yes.
What is GESAL? First and foremost, Mr. Watson, what is GESAL?
Before I do that, let me give you a history to that.
Okay.
You know, the African Development Bank president, Adesina, used to work for AGRA.
Okay.
And as far back as those times, they started a similar program in Kenya called Profit. The idea here was, how do you really de-risk the banking sector so that they'll be able to give loans to agriculture? That's the whole idea. So the whole idea is you put in a de-risking mechanism, and then you put in an incentive and enablers for banks to feel attractive and go there. Government is not putting money for people to go and take loans. No. The banks will use their own balance sheets to give out loans. But what government is trying to do is, I have this facility here. In case of default, it's like a guarantee.
Okay.
Okay? I'm also putting an insurance mechanism so that in case of default, we can fall back on insurance. At the same time, we can also put an insurance system to support the value chain actors so that you can de-risk them. Then the bank will feel comfortable and put in money. So that's the background to it. Now, when Adesina left AGRA, he went to Nigeria and became a Nigerian agric minister.
Yeah.
So he propagated the gospel and set up the NESAL.
Gospel according to Adesina.
So Adesina set up the gospel in Nigeria to look at that. And I think it was doing well. So Ghana, at that time, AGRA thought that, why don't we move the same thing to Ghana? So the idea, we mooted the idea. Then it takes a while. It has a gestation period. So we sent people from Ghana to go and learn what Nigeria is doing, what Kenya is doing. So there was a learning period. Okay? That is why you see that long spell that we haven't done anything.
Okay.
So they were learning.
Okay.
Then it got to a point where African Development Bank said, now Adesina is an African Development Bank, sitting in the seat and driving the seat. And said, no, I want to support the Ghana one. So they came in and said, okay, we will provide 14.5 million for the risk. You see, let me tell you, it has it's a 6 pillar.
Okay.
But the two broader areas, the risk, de-risking mechanism, and then the incentive and enabler.
Okay.
The de-risking mechanism has a risk facility, sharing facility. So African Development Bank is contributing 14.5 million to the risk facility. Government is putting its own money, 400 million Ghana cedi. That's $91 million.
Okay.
And I think now Central Bank is raising about 68-point-something million. Okay. Now there's also a component called the technical assistance facility. Nobody is putting in money there. That is where AGRA is putting money. AGRA is putting money into the technical assistance facility. We started a seed money of $350,000. The technical assistance facility is supposed to help the banks themselves to strengthen their understanding about agriculture. Okay. That's what I talked about.
Yeah.
Because they lack that capacity to understand how the agricultural...
The knowledge of it.
Exactly. Yeah. How that value chain actually works.
Okay.
Okay? And then after that, we also look at the value chain actors to understand that loans are 5 letter word. You need to pay back. So we need to really also help them and walk them through to understand what the requirements the banks are looking for. Once we are able to do that and build capacities from both ends, we believe strongly that the banks will feel comfortable to put their money there.
Okay. Mr. Morrison, from Mr. Watson's assertions, look, this is a fantastic thing. It's been done in Nigeria. It's working. The president of the AFDB himself was spearheading it in his country. And I'm sure it's improved agricultural fortunes. Should we have implemented this before our agricultural programs? Should this had been done before agricultural programs, or the time was not good enough to do this before agricultural programs?
Well, thank you very much. I think this is the right time for GESAL, because Nigeria have to look at, just as you were saying, Nigeria have to look at it again after implementing it. There were some challenges. They have to go and then reinvent some of the things so that it suits the current need. So I think this is the right time after we've learned enough from Nigeria and from Kenya. We also need to understand, those of us in the industry ought to understand that, yes, insurance, first of all, depend on me. if I have my livestock farm, I need to make sure that, yes, of course, in terms of the structures, I have to insure. Nobody's coming to insure it for you. No credit agency or bank will insure it for you. You need to go and insure it. And that is one thing that we need to do. GESL coming in, just as you said, the technicalities, provided the technical knowledge for the financial institutions to understand what is required, the processes of when you say somebody wants to do rice farming, the processes when you say somebody wants to do aquaculture, you ought to understand. Now, our worry is its implementation, okay? Speaking to some board members who have given me an in-depth understanding with the GESL and its implementation. If we can get rural folks, and I know now some of the education is going on, but we need to intensify it. That's the worry. If we can get the rural folks who are actually in need of this facility to understand what this facility ought to be doing for them. As we speak now, most of the people who actually know GESL are probably the national best farmers and
in the suits and ties.
So and you see, the commercial banks, if I know the government is not giving money to the commercial banks, but we need to bring in the rural banks into the industry, into this whole scheme, and get the rural banks to actually get to understand that, okay, there is this facility here, and this is how you can bring in smaller holder farmers. This is what you can do to bring in the cooperatives so that they can get to benefit and enjoy from the GESL scheme. And otherwise, this is a fantastic thing.
Okay, yeah. So from what I gather from both of you, GESL is a fantastic idea, and if we can argue, it's going to revolutionize lending or financing in the agricultural sector.
Actually, that is what it's supposed to be.
Okay. As we come to the end of our discussion, we've gone through the growth rate of agriculture, we've seen the share of GDP, we've touched on finance. In 30 seconds, as we wrap up, I'll start with Mr. Boateng. We are ending the year 2018. 2019 is about to start. New agricultural initiatives from the government. We should see GESL coming on board. What's your outlook for the agricultural sector, broadly?
For me, it looks very bright. Okay. The fact that you have a government or you have a minister or you have a point in time in our history where government sees to it as farmers need productivity enhancing technologies like improved seeds, like fertilizer. It's just a magic. Okay. Because the seed can make a magic. The seed has a genetic gain, and that would turn the fortunes of farmers around. Farmers have been sitting on the fence using their own safe seed and getting about 2-3 bags. Now farmers can attest to the fact that they are using improved seeds, and now they are getting about 20-30 bags. For me, that's a quantum leap, and that is what we should support. Mr.
Morrison, your outlook on the sector?
Very bright, but I think that with its brightness, we need to look at the interest rate. We've spoken about everything. We've not looked at the interest rate, and which is very critical. Okay, so let's look at how we can bring down interest rates for the industry. If you go to Kenya, I think they are doing 11%. You go to Togo, 9.10 or thereof, 9 to 10. So we need to look at it and also look at equipment financing for the industry, which is very, very, very important.
Okay. Just on the interest rates, before I wrap up, Bank of Ghana implemented the Ghana reference rates in order to make our market rates or interest rates more market driven. It was done in April 2018. As we speak, interest rates are trending downwards. It may be marginal, but marginal. Bank of Ghana says we should see it kick in fully. Sure. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so we've had a very interesting discussion. Agricultural growth rates, its share of GDP, and most importantly, financing, and then the innovative way we're going to finance. The Ghana incentive-based risk-sharing system for agricultural lending. It's a mouthful, but simply it's GESL. Both our guests agree that yes, it will revolutionize financing in the sector, but there are other things that need to be put in place. This has been PM Express Business Edition. My guest, Mr. Foster Boateng, he's the Regional Director of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, and Mr. Anthony Morrison, he's with the Chamber of Agribusiness in Ghana. My name is Philip Nanfuri. Thank you.